Now, one of the things I think is worth pointing out, Madam Speaker, is the impact of detentions on mental health for a woman or a child who's now in a mandatory detention center because the minister arbitrarily has decided to put them in that class. And we can take a look here of a multidisciplinary team of university researchers. And the team members included Dr. Rousseau in the Psychiatric Department of McGill University, Professor Francois Crepeau, Hans and Tamer Oppenheimer, Professor in Public International Law at McGill University, and the list goes on, who concluded a 3-year study funded by the Canadian Institute of Health Research on the impact of detention in Canada on adult asylum seekers. Based on their expertise in this area, they predict that the mandatory long-term detention as proposed in this bill will have a severe negative impact on refugee claimants' mental health, especially on the most vulnerable, children, pregnant women, survivors of rape and torture. Our preliminary results based on a sample of, based on a sample of 54 refugee claimants detailed in the Laval and Toronto immigration holding centres show that even a short period of detention is associated with high levels of anxiety and depression. After only 16 days of detention, 30% of refugee claimants met the criteria for depression, 22% for anxiety. Studies have consistently shown that detainees' mental health and problems tends to worsen over time, and they are more likely to persist even after release when detention is prolonged. Now, I hear some members heckling on the other side about that. I'm talking about people that might have been raped or tortured, pregnant women, children. Let's remember who we're talking about. Let's remember the people that could potentially be impacted by this detention. Another thing that we need to look at in this bill, Madam Speaker, is the fact that it imposes a duty of inquiry on people who provide assistance. And that may seem relatively innocuous at first, but if you're a church group that makes a determination that you want to help a claimant because you think the situation they're coming out of is desperate and dangerous, no longer is the burden going to be on the state to prove that there was not a violation of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, but rather that burden of proof would literally fall upon the church or independent organization that sought to assist that refugee, placing all that burden of proof on that individual instead of placing it on the state. This bill would also seek even, and this is quite remarkable and something I think we need to debate as we move forward, that even if you are successful in claiming that you're a refugee, even if you find a way to convince this government that you being sent back would mean your certain death, torture, or some other horrible outcome for you, that the government reserves the right after 5 years, after you've spent 5 years in Canada and naturalized here and begin establishing roots, to say, we changed our mind, you're out of here. So you spend 5 years here, you're a legitimate refugee, and then after those 5 years, see you later. You're back out. So that person, while they're here in 5 years, obviously is going to be living under a constant threat and cloud of being tossed out. How are they going to be able to establish themselves? How are they going to be able to make a meaningful contribution to Canadian society? During that 5-year ban, again, we're talking about legitimate refugees, Madam Speaker. They are also barred from applying for permanent residence. They're barred from traveling outside of the country for 5 years. And they can't sponsor family members. And let's remember who these family members are. This would be their wife, or their husband, or their children. So, Madam Speaker, we need to proceed very carefully, because when we change legislation, it has profound implications. There is no question that we need to get tough with those that would smuggle the most desperate and the most weak out there. But this bill, full of its flaws, appears to me to be infinitely more about playing politics than it is about finding solutions. And anybody who hoped, as they read headlines, that this bill would be the thing that saves us from future situations such as we saw, I think will be sorely disappointed when they look beneath the veneer. Because like so much of what the Conservative Party puts forward, it's about the talking points. It isn't about the substance.
On a point of order, the Minister of Public Security.